Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Coming together. Last episode. Chapter 31 to 37. When I got home, my parents noticed my lip right away, kind of hard to hide. I said I'd been sparring with Daniel, who played along, teasing me about not ducking fast enough. Dad was on the computer, tracking the wildfires. I wasn't eager to retreat to the silence of my bedroom, so I suggested we keep Dad company. The four of us played poker until Dad decided he could stop monitoring the situation and grab a few hours of sleep. That night I lay in bed for hours, thinking mostly about what Rafe said. I tossed and turned, but I could smell the forest through my open window, and it was like trying to sleep when I was starving and could smell steak grilling outside. Finally I got up to close the window. I stood there, looking out. Moonlight flooded the yard. Scents washed over me. Even the sounds of the forest seemed to call to me, and I told myself I was just reacting to what Rafe said, but that wasn't true. I'd felt this way for the last 3 nights. Only now I knew what it meant, and that made all the difference. I wanted to go out. I wanted so badly to go out. Even Fitz, stretched on the railing again, watched me as if to say, "Well, are you coming?" When I stepped out the balcony doors, he chirped, rising and stretching. Then I climbed onto the railing and crouched there, and he chirped again, glanced over, and leaped. He landed awkwardly, then looked up at me, yellow eyes glinting. I jumped. I hit the ground in a crouch. Pain darted through my legs, but I'd instinctively landed right, without injury. Just like Rafe and Annie. Just like a cat. Fitz's chirp pulled me from my thoughts. He started toward the forest, then glanced back to see if I was coming. I followed. After a few steps, a cold nose brushed my hand and I looked down to see Kenji, seeming worried as she nudged me. I patted her head and told her I was fine, and she followed at my side. Fitz trotted along at a distance, as if he was simply heading the same way. The forest was like a warm wave washing over me. My muscles relaxed, my heart rate slowed, and quiet energy pulsed through me. I glanced at Kenji and Fitz, then over at the recuperation shed, the animals inside stirring, as if they sensed me nearby. We get our energy from nature. Control over animals. Healing powers. Sound familiar? I shivered, and Kenji licked my fingers, whining. I patted her absently and gazed around, as if I expected to see something. See what? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're looking for what drew you out here. I searched the darkness. I'm over here. I spun to see Rafe on the edge of the clearing. He stepped back, hands raised. That was a warning, so I wouldn't spook you. A wry smile. Not much chance of that, I suppose, finding me outside your house at 2 in the morning. What are you doing here? I'm not stalking you, as bad as it looks. I wasn't going near your house. I couldn't sleep, and I thought maybe you couldn't either, so I walked over, in case you came out. That's quite a hike. He shrugged and stepped toward me, then stopped short. Your lip. Sam. He swore. What happened? Daniel and I bumped into her, and I shrugged. It's not important. It's Daniel, he said. What? She likes Daniel. Along with every girl in this town except you. He's the local equivalent of the high school quarterback. He stepped closer. But if she's got you in her sights, Watch out, Maya. She's got problems. And she has a crush on Daniel. I don't think it's like that. Then why'd she flip out when Nicole went to your party with him? What? Haley said she heard them fighting next door before the party. Sam found out Nicole was going with Daniel and lit into her. That's what Haley was talking to me about after the climb. Saying how surprised she was that Sam showed up, and that Nicole better watch her back. He met my gaze. I'd say the same to you. I know you and Daniel are just friends, but Sam. She's unstable. A memory flashed, something Serena said about Sam. While I tried to recall it, Rafe took another step forward. How are you doing? He said. Other than that. What do you think? You told me I'm a shapeshifter. That I'm going to change into a cougar. That someday I might not change back. Just, not sleeping well these days. Another step closer, but still keeping his distance. Is it the dreams? I looked up at him. Dreams of the forest, he said. Of running. You wake up with a fever. You need to get outside. I nodded. Me, too. It started a little while ago. Annie went through it just before. She started to shift. It's the calling. The start of the transformation. So it's coming. I tried not to shiver. How much longer? A couple of weeks with Annie. He paused. We need to talk about all that, but later. Let's just, he looked out at the forest, then at me. Let's just go for now. Run. Work it off. It'll help you sleep. He backed into the forest, and his eyes shone like amber. Come on, he whispered. I know you're still mad at me, but I won't try anything. Just forget that for now and come on. Forget that for now and come on. God, how I wanted to. I wanted to forget everything he'd done. Just go with him, be with him, run with him, and let it be the way it was before, the way it was in my dreams. I looked at him, half hidden in the shadows, watching me, waiting for me, and I wanted it so badly tears prickled my eyes and I blinked hard. Maya. He stepped back into the clearing. I can't. I sucked in cool night air can't. He exhaled, a loud sigh that made Kenji slip over and nudge his hand. Do you want to talk? He asked. I shook my head. Kenji returned to my side and whined. At a chirp from overhead, I looked up to see Fitz watching from a tree branch. You've got this whole power over animals thing down a lot better than me, Rafe said, trying for a smile. They like me well enough, but that's about it. And the healing part, too. You don't have to make nice, Rafe. I know you want my help finding the people who did this to us. But I need those answers, too. I'm not stupid. God forbid, he muttered. What's that supposed to mean? Just agreeing. You're not stupid. He sat on a tree stump. You think you could have handled this better, don't you? What? You understand why I needed to find you, but you disagree with the way I did it. Yeah. Hitting on girls you don't care about, pretending to be someone you're not, pretending you like them. Sure, guys take that road all the time, hoping for a shortcut. But that doesn't mean it's okay. Whoa, wait a minute. Are you saying I'm no better than guys who? You think it's okay to hurt people to get what you want, just like they do? Yes, I think you could have found another way to do it. I just don't think you wanted to bother. Or maybe I didn't have the brains. I never said. You would have thought up a better way. I'm not going to fight with you about this. I turned to go. You think you did the right thing. I think you didn't. No amount of arguing is going to change that. Haley's right, he said. You don't give an inch to anyone. What? You heard me. Seems Haley's telling you a lot. A word of advice? She's not the most reliable source of information in Salmon Creek. Because she tried to cheat on her math homework in 7th grade. That was a long time ago. Exactly her point. You caught her breaking into your locker to copy your math homework. One screw-up that you've never forgotten. If she says I squealed on her, she's lying. The teachers never found out. Because you handled it your own way. You started ignoring her. And if you ignored her, then your friends did, too. So I turned her into the school outcast. I laughed. Seriously, does she seem like an outcast to you? She's got her crowd. It's just not my crowd. She hangs out with us when she wants to. Nicole doesn't ignore her. Corey definitely doesn't ignore her. No, he'll make out with her when he's had a beer or two and there's no one else around. But if you and Daniel can't stand her, then she's not dating material. That's crap. Yes, I don't trust Haley, and, yes, it started with that homework. But if she's telling people that I've made her life miserable for 5 years because of it. I shook my head and started to turn away. Rafe stepped in front of me. I'm sure she's the one still holding a grudge. I also think she's the one who dosed your drink. But the point, Maya, is that you don't give anyone a second chance. One strike and we're out. So I'm inflexible and intolerant. Maybe. Well, then it's a good thing you're done with me, isn't it? I headed for the house. Rafe let out a curse. I heard a thump and a gasp of pain. I glanced back to see him cradling his hand, the small tree beside him quivering from a blow. He looked up and caught me watching. Then he spun and strode into the forest. 32. As I approached the house, I could see Mom on the porch, her feet bare as she tugged on one of my dad's jackets and peered anxiously into the forest. When she saw me, she let out a sigh of relief. I heard voices, she said. Was that Rafe? Yes. She pulled the jacket around her and lowered her voice. I know you really like him, Maya, but you can't be meeting him. I wasn't. It's over. Oh. She waited until I was on the porch. Did you just break up now? I shook my head. Earlier. He came by to see if I'd talk. Maybe work things out. We couldn't. I'm sorry. She gave me a hug, then ushered me into the house, Kenji following. She led me to the kitchen and started fixing a snack. I wasn't hungry, but I wasn't eager to go to bed either. Kenji lay at my feet and I petted her as Mom put crackers on a plate. As she was slicing cheese, she said, with her back still to me, "Your lip. Does that have anything to do with? Did Rafe hit me? 1. I wouldn't sneak into the woods to talk to a guy who split my lip. 2. If something like that happened, Daniel would never help me cover it up." Sorry, she said, bringing the plate to the table. I had to ask. I know. She sat across from me. I nibbled on a cheese-covered cracker. After a minute, she said, "He wasn't what you thought he was." Exactly what Daniel had said. I nodded, then I asked, "Do you think I'm intolerant?" She frowned. In what way? If someone screws up, I won't give him a second chance. I've made up my mind about him and I won't trust him again. Is that what Rafe said? Something like that. She leaned back in her chair and watched me for a moment before she responded. He wasn't who you thought he was, and you're angry with him for tricking you. I nodded. If I'm right, though, you're even more angry with yourself for not seeing it. I put down my cracker. But I did see it. That's the problem. I saw what he was before anyone else did. A player. I nodded. He knew I wasn't going to fall for that, so he showed me. I picked at the cheese on my cracker. He showed me something else. Another part of himself, she said softly. And you fell for him. I wanted to deny it. Salvage my pride and say, no, it wasn't that way, I only liked him a little. But it was that way. So I nodded, and she reached out for my hand. That's what you're really upset about. Being tricked. Yes, you set high standards for people. Too high sometimes. But you set higher ones for yourself, and that's what worries me more, Maya. I want you to have big dreams, big goals. I want you to strive to achieve them. But I don't want to see you beating yourself up every time you make a mistake. I nodded. I don't know the whole situation with Rafe, and I'm not going to pry, she said. But if he's trying to talk to you, you should hear him out. Maybe you can forgive him. More important, forgive yourself. As Mom was cleaning up, I thought about what Rafe said, about the experiments. I was genetically modified. And I was living in a medical research town. Again I pictured that list of names. Does Dad have a relative named Elizabeth Delaney? Mom paused. Isn't that his cousin Greg's wife? No, that's Bethany, I think. You should ask him. God knows he has plenty of relatives. Did you meet someone online? I shook my head. After another minute, I asked, how exactly did Dad get this job? Someone at school said the St. Clouds just offered him the job. She laughed and sat down again. I wish it'd been that easy. If someone's implying that he had connections and was handed his position, the answer is no. I'm sure that applies to some people here, but not us. This St. Cloud Corporation wanted a new park warden, so they hired a headhunter. Do you know what that is? A company that looks for people matching a job description. Right. This St. Clouds wanted a specific kind of person. They preferred a young warden with a young family. And, if not Canadian, then with a Canadian connection, to make the transition easier. Someone who'd put down roots and stay. Become part of the community. Exactly. When we arrived for the interview, there were a half-dozen other applicants. We suited the profile better than most. I'm Canadian, with family nearby, and, as much as I loved Oregon, I wanted to come home. You were the same age as a lot of the kids here. And your dad came with glowing recommendations. Still, we almost missed out. A woman got the offer first but ended up turning it down. What did I expect? That my family was linked to the St. Clouds by this Project Genesis? That they just happened to be living in Oregon when I was found and were approved to adopt me? Or that the St. Clouds were the scientists who genetically modified me, and they'd found me and lured my parents here? If I thought about it more, I'd have realized there couldn't be a connection. The research going on here was drug-related, not genetic. The St. Clouds weren't mad scientists, they were a legitimate corporation. You could find them on the internet and find links to the drug companies they owned. It might seem coincidental being genetically modified and living in a medical research town, but I couldn't see any connection beyond that. My parents obviously knew nothing of my past, and neither did the St. Clouds. When I got back to bed, I fell straight into a nightmare about Serena. Saw her disappearing under the water as if yanked down. Swam out and felt someone yanking me down. When the hand released me, I started to swim up. Then pain sliced through my legs, so sharp and strong that I howled. Water filled my lungs. I jolted awake. My legs seized and I had to jam my pillow against my mouth to keep from screaming. It felt like a dozen Charlie horses hitting at once, excruciating cramps that brought tears to my eyes. If I could have cried out, I think I would have. But the pain clamped my jaws shut and all I could do was lie on my side in agony until, slowly, my muscles began to relax. As I massaged them, the knotted muscles felt like golf balls under my skin. I inhaled and exhaled as deeply as I could, remembering all my runner's tricks for dealing with leg cramps. Only these weren't from running. I heard Rafe's voice. Muscle pains. I've been getting them a lot lately. When I could stand, I walked to my mirror. I lifted one bare arm and made a fist, watching my muscles bunch and imagined them bunching more, changing, first sprouting as my upper arm became a thick foreleg, my fist turned to a paw, huge claws sheathed. I shook my arm and turned away. People couldn't turn into animals. They just couldn't. But you saw it. And that was the reason I hadn't protested, hadn't questioned. I'd watched Annie shift. If I really wanted to, I could find an explanation, however lame. I was overtired from sleepless nights, I'd hallucinated, I'd been drugged. Only I hadn't considered any of that. I'd accepted it, maybe even more easily than I accepted the news that my mother was white, not because I'd rather be a skinwalker than Caucasian, but because this felt like the truth. All my life I'd felt like I didn't quite know who I was. I'd chalked that up to the adoption, not knowing my family, not knowing my tribe. But that wasn't the missing piece. This was. I could stand in front of the mirror and mentally refuse to believe a person could change into an animal, but in my heart I knew it was true. One day, like Annie, I'd be running through the forest on all fours, smelling, seeing, hearing, and feeling the world as a big cat. One day? No. If Rafe was right about the dreams and the muscle cramps, that day was coming fast. The thought of it made my stomach seize. In relief, excitement, or downright terror. Probably a little of each. When would it happen? How would it happen? What would it be like? Could I prepare? And the rest, the part of becoming like Annie that I was trying so hard not to think about. The part where I lost my human reason and began a true descent into animal. How long after the first shift would that start? How much time would I have to find answers and make sure that didn't happen to me? No, how much time would we have? Rafe and I. As much as it hurt to be around him, I needed him. We wanted the same answers, and he had a lot more of them already than I did. Maybe I had screwed up with Rafe. What mattered was that he was the guy with the facts and, I hoped, a plan. When I got downstairs the next morning, Daniel was already up, sitting with Dad, looking over his shoulder as he monitored the fires. "So what's the latest word from the flaming frontier?" I asked as I poured myself an orange juice. "It's not flaming enough to cancel school," Dad said. I glanced at the map on the computer. "I'm guessing those red spots are fire. Looks safe for now, but what about the animals?" "I'm driving them to the refuge this morning," Mom said. "They'll keep them until the fire watch ends." I gave her a hug. "Thank you." She handed me her teacup for a refill. I took it and ignored Daniel's outstretched empty coffee mug. He arched his brows. "You want a ride to school or not? If you don't drive me in, Dad will have to. There are dangerous predators on the loose." Daniel sighed and got up to fill his mug. "You okay?" he whispered as he stood beside me at the counter. I nodded and turned to Dad. Speaking of predators, any luck finding Marv? Dad shook his head. Right now, the focus is on this fire. Good. I hoped any cougar hunts were postponed for a while. Otherwise, with Annie roaming the woods in cat form, we could have another problem to deal with. Daniel and I took care of the animals and got them ready for transport. When we arrived at school, I left Daniel with Corey and Brendan, and went off in search of Rafe. I checked the smoking pit first. Haley was there. She glanced at me, and I nodded, then moved on, rounding the school to start down the path he'd take to get here. Looking for Rafe, a voice said behind me. It was Haley. Her expression was guarded, and I thought of what Rafe had said. She was right, I'd never gotten past that incident with the math homework. I hadn't consciously held it against her, but it had changed the way I saw her. I'd backed off, and maybe others had, too. I should have noticed, and I hadn't. That didn't justify all the crappy things she'd done to me and said about me since, but it did make me look at her a little differently as she came down the path. I heard you guys broke up, she said. We did. Did you decide he wasn't good enough for you? If I had, I wouldn't be looking for him, would I? I didn't say that. Didn't have the energy to fight back. Just shook my head and kept walking. Maya. I glanced over. What happened to your lip? There wasn't any nasty snap in Haley's voice now. It wasn't Rafe, I said. I started to turn away again. He likes you. I looked at her. She shrugged. I'm just saying, if you didn't want to break up, he'll come back. He really likes you. A sardonic twist of a smile. Everyone does. She walked away. I wanted to go after her, but I didn't know what to say. I carried on along the path again and didn't get far before someone else hailed me. When I saw Sam jogging along, I tensed and glanced around. We were still within sight of the school. Safe enough. She stopped in front of me. For a minute, she just stared at my lip. Then she pulled her gaze up to my eyes and said, I'm sorry. I remembered what Rafe said and what Mom said, and I resisted the urge to say whatever and walk away. But I wasn't going to say it's okay, either, because it wasn't. Why'd you hit me? I said. I didn't mean to. Her gaze shunted to the side. I get mad sometimes, okay? Like Daniel does, only he can control it and I can't. Like with Rafe's sister. Her cheeks colored. I wouldn't have hit her. I could tell she was, slow. But I was mad at Rafe for not taking a hint, and when she laughed at me for wanting him to stay away, I blew up. I stopped, though. You didn't with me. I wanted those pages. Why? Because they said your parents had been murdered? How come that's a secret? I waited for her to explode. How come that's a secret? Would I want everyone knowing my parents had been murdered? Would I want them asking questions? Looking at me funny? Wondering what exactly I'd seen? She didn't say any of that, just scowled and started to walk away. What else was in those pages? I called. She stopped, her shoulders tensing. There was more, wasn't there? Something you didn't want me to see. She turned, then, and gave me this look that made me shiver. A figure appeared around the bend, bearing down fast. Sam opened her mouth, as if to say something, then wheeled to walk away and smacked into Daniel. Daniel. You going to take a swing at me, too, Sam? Sam stammered denials and Daniel told her off, but I wasn't listening. Last night, I'd started to remember something Serena said about Sam before she died. Now seeing her with Daniel, it came back. Serena had been at my place, holding down a rabbit while I changed its dressing. I had a run-in with Sam last night. Sam? Yeah. I was at the blender with Nicole, when you and Daniel were taking this little guy to Dr. Hajek. There were a couple of summer boys there, college guys hiking the island. They came over and flirted with us. Nicole got shy, like she always does, and I was trying to show her how it's done. Uh-huh. She laughed. Okay, I was kind of flirting back. But you know me. I don't mean anything by it. Even Daniel only gives me age for teasing the poor guys. Anyway, I'm flirting and Sam stops in to grab a burger. Acts like she doesn't know us, of course. I talk to the guys a bit more, then Nick and I leave. Okay. I cut through the woods to Daniel's place. I'm by the ridge, and who pops up? Sam. She tears a strip out of me for flirting with the summer boys. Says it's disrespectful to Daniel. I tell her to mind her own freaking business. Calls me a blonde twit who doesn't appreciate what she's got. She said someone needed to teach me a lesson. I laughed, which was the wrong thing to do, because she gave me this look, this really scary look. Serena tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. I know that sounds dumb, but it spooked me. Then Daniel got there. He heard us fighting. I told him what she was mad about, that I'd been flirting with summer boys. He just shrugged and said, so, but Sam gives me that look again and stomps off. Was Rafe right that Sam had a crush on Daniel? I'd never thought so, but maybe she just didn't express her feelings the way most girls did. Sam didn't do anything the way most girls did. I remembered my dream, about Serena being pulled under. She had gone down so fast she did seem to be dragged. And I had felt something grab my leg. How angry had Sam been with Serena? How jealous over Daniel? Jealous enough to teach her a lesson that had gone very, very wrong? But how would she do it? Slip into the water at the wooded edge, then swim under it and hold Serena down long enough to drown her? That was crazy. No one could hold her breath longer than Serena. Daniel brushed past Sam like she wasn't there and came to me. He leaned down to whisper, "She do anything?" I shook my head as the bell rang. We started back toward school. "You need to stay away from her," Daniel murmured when Sam was out of earshot. "I know." 33. Rafe didn't show up that morning. With every passing minute the questions weighed heavier, until by the time the break bell went, I was so distracted, I didn't hear it, just sat there, pretending to listen to a lesson long over. Fingers tentatively touched my shoulder. I looked up to see Nicole. The classroom was almost empty. Daniel stood at the door, as if he'd just realized I hadn't left my seat. Nicole mouthed, "I've got it," and waved him on. "Daydreaming, I guess." I stood. She cleared her throat. "I know I'm not the person you want to talk to about this." "About Rafe? That's why you didn't call last night?" "I'm not Serena." "No, that's not." "It is." "I get that. You guys were best friends. Except, well, there are things you can't talk to Daniel about, right? He didn't like Rafe, so he's happy you guys broke up. If you're not happy about it, you can't talk to him." She was right. "You like Rafe?" She led me from the classroom, voice lowered as we walked into the crowded hall. "I don't need to be Serena to see that. I've watched you with other guys, summer boys. That's just for fun. This is different." Right again. Is it because of the party? She asked. You think maybe he did drug you? Because I'm sure it was Haley. If you want, we could try to prove it. Break into her place, look for the dope. I stared at Nicole. Her cheeks colored. What can I say? I'm a closet rebel. But if it's not the party thing, is it because he came on strong when you were drugged? I could help with that, too. You guys arrange a date and I'll be close by, so there's someone you can call if things get out of hand. You'll be my secret bodyguard. I grinned at her. You really are a rebel. She flushed more. Hardly. I just think you guys are good for each other. I looked at Nicole. I'd misjudged her. Just like I'd misjudged Sam. And maybe Haley. And Rafe? I didn't even want to think about that one. I'd always considered myself such a good judge of character. The last few days, it seemed I was finding out I didn't know anyone except Daniel. Do you want to come over this weekend? I asked. Mom's taking the animals to the refuge in Victoria today, and I plan to go on the weekend to see the fledglings get their first flying lesson. Her eyes lit up. Seriously? I'd love that. I've always wanted to go there. I'd have invited you before, but I didn't think you were much of an animal person. I am. Smaller animals anyway. You can keep your cougars. But, well, animals were your thing, yours and Serena's. And yours and Daniel's. I didn't want to intrude. We'll go together, just you and me. She smiled and we headed off to our next class. When we broke for lunch, I caught up with Daniel outside the classroom. Corey and Brendan took off, saying they'd meet up with us at our table. What's wrong? Daniel said. Noth. If those guys can tell something's wrong, then it is, Maya. I led him to a corner and waved to Nicole that I'd catch up with her later. Daniel and I stepped out the side door into the empty yard. I caught the faint smell of smoke on the wind and turned, frowning. I was about to mention it but decided not to. If I hinted the fires were getting closer, he'd never let me do what I was about to ask. I need a huge favor, I said. And you know I wouldn't ask this if it wasn't important. Okay. Can I borrow your truck? He lifted one brow. That's a huge favor? You can borrow it anytime. You drive just fine. I needed to go see Rafe. Now. Over lunch. Oh. His gaze shuddered. No, I'm not asking for your truck because I want to get back together with him. I'm worried about him and his sister being out there with the fire threat. They should be in town. He relaxed. Good idea. Under normal circumstances, I'd run there, and try to make it back by the end of lunch period, but not when we might have a man-killing cat roaming around. Come on. I'll drive you. He started toward the lot. I jogged up beside him. You don't have to do that. Go eat your lunch. I've got some energy bars in the glove box. I jostled him. What, you don't trust me to drive your baby? Go on. I can handle it. It's not that. She's been acting up lately, remember? I don't want you stranded and walking back through the forest. Getting a lift from Daniel was going to make it a whole lot tougher to ask Rafe about skinwalkers. But I'd have to work with it. The important thing was checking on him and Annie. It took nearly as long to drive there as it did to walk. We had to travel out of town on the main road, then find the rutted lane Mr. Skylark had used for his truck. It was clear enough for Daniel's pickup to make it through, but it wasn't a trip he'd want to do daily. When we got to the cabin, it was dark inside. I told myself they were just careful about using the generator fuel costs money. Daniel parked 20 feet away and said he'd wait there for me, maybe get out and stretch his legs. I knocked, then opened the door and my breath hitched. It wasn't just empty, it was empty. The crates that stored their clothes and food now held only an item or two. I knew Rafe might leave when I couldn't provide answers, but I never thought he'd just go. As upset and hurt as I'd been, I'd held on to the scrap of hope that he really did care about me, that he wasn't just trying to make nice to secure my help. Wrong again. The moment he realized I didn't have any information that would help his sister, he'd left. I was backing out of the cabin when I noticed a piece of folded paper on the floor weighted down by a rock. I nudged the rock with my foot and saw my name. When I picked up the note, something fell out, and dropped beside the rock. I ignored it and took the note to the window to read it. Left this AM. Will come back when I have answers. There was another line, so scratched out I couldn't decipher a word. I stared at the note for a second, then remembered the fallen object. I squinted at the floor but saw only the pale rock. I patted around until I found something, then rose, lifting it to the light. It was the rawhide band with the cat's eye stone, Rafe's bracelet, the one his mother gave him. I clutched it in my hand. My breath hitched again, heart pounding. Don't read anything into it, Maya. You know you can't read anything into it. I opened the note again. Just those 2 lines. Cool and emotionless. Left. Will return. I held the page up to the window, trying to see what he'd crossed out. Okay, now you're just being pathetic. Get a grip, Maya. The guy is gone. I looked down at the bracelet in my hand. No sign of them. Daniel said from the doorway. I jumped and stuffed the bracelet into my pocket. Sorry. I know I said I'd stay outside, but I didn't hear you talking to anyone. He stepped inside. I don't want to freak you out, Maya. I'm sure they're just out in the woods, but there are signs of a cougar all over the place. I know your dad's busy with this fire threat. We need to get him over here, though, just in case. They're fine. I lifted the note. They left. Left. Back to the States or whatever. He didn't look convinced. I still think we should call your dad. There are prints, scat, clawed trees. Even fur. A cougar has been here and been here a lot, and that's small tracks. I said. Like a young female. I guess so. I need to tell you something. I wanted to say that. God, I wanted to say it. Here was the perfect segue. But the words wouldn't come. Instead I said, okay, we should go, then. We need to get back to school. Actually, I thought maybe we'd head into Nanaimo, he said as we walked out. There's something I need to look up. And, apparently, I can't do it here. He reached into his pocket and handed me a piece of paper. I found that in the Braun cottage. I was going to show it to you, but then with Sam turning up and the stuff about my mom, I decided it could wait. I wanted to find out what it meant before I brought it to you. I tried this morning, but my laptop wouldn't let me search for it. What? The nanny software kicked in. No idea why. I unfolded the sheet to find 4 words written on it. The top one we'd already seen. Benandanti. That's the word I began. From that book. So Mina didn't just pick a random page for her note after all. But the word below it, isn't that the one the old woman used? Navajo fur skinwalker. It was. So Mina was here investigating me? Was that what this meant? So why send us to that book about the Benandanti? I need to tell you something, Daniel. I clutched the note and took a deep breath as we walked out of the cabin. There's something As we stepped out, the smell hit me like a slap on the face, knocking every other thought out of my head. Daniel stopped in his tracks. Is that fire? I said. He swore and prodded me toward the truck. I dug in my heels and shook my head. It's just someone burning trash. The forest fires wouldn't have reached this far this fast. My dad would have called me. I took out my cell phone and opened it. No service, Daniel said. I looked over to see him staring down at his. In the truck, he said. Now. I was hurrying around it when a crashing in the undergrowth made me spin. A stag barreled into the clearing. Spotting us, it froze, and I didn't need to see its rolling eyes or flaring nostrils. I could feel its fear, a stark terror that made the hair on my neck rise. It thundered off, crashing through the trees in blind panic. Fire was coming. 34. He yanked open the truck door and jumped in. Daniel jammed the key into the ignition and cranked it. Nothing happened. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He turned it again and again, twisting it back and forth, then letting go, slamming his palms against the steering wheel. I opened my door. We'll walk. The fire can't be that close. No. Just hold on. He took a deep breath, then tried again, calmer now. My dad always said that when the wildlife started to flee, it was time to take cover. By that point, you can't outrun it on foot. On the second twist, the engine caught, faltered, then roared to life. Daniel nodded, slammed it into drive, hit the gas end. The tires spun. No way. No way. He threw open the door. Slide over. When I yell, hit the gas. He pushed. I accelerated. The tires spun, refusing to take hold. Ash settled on the hood. I hit the gas harder. Finally, the truck jolted from the rut and sped forward. I hit the brakes. No. Daniel yelled. Keep her rolling. I glanced in the mirrors to see him racing along the side of the truck. He grabbed the door and yanked it open. I turned my attention back to the road. Daniel swung in, then slammed the door shut and collapsed in the passenger seat, panting. Always wanted to do that, haven't you? I said. He laughed and struggled to catch his breath. Ash frosted his hair and shoulders. Just keep going, he said. It's rough, and if you slow down, she'll get stuck again. Rough was right. I hadn't noticed it as a passenger, but now I felt every jerk, every roll. Another deer raced past us. Then a fox, so panicked it almost ran under the wheels. The animals were heading toward town. That meant the fire was in the other direction. Good. When we reached the road, I could see a wall of smoke over the distant treetops. I see it, Daniel said, before I could speak. His voice was low, and calm now. Do you want me to take over? I shook my head and hit the gas, driving as fast as I dared on the winding road. The ash stopped falling. When I looked in the rearview mirror, though, I could still see the smoke. How can it be coming in so fast? I said. You know the saying. Spreads like wildfire. Sure, but this seems too fast. He shrugged. It didn't matter. Just get to safety. As I drove, Daniel checked his cell phone. Still no service. I said. Don't worry about it. We'll be there in A huge shape leaped from the bushes. I hit the brakes as Daniel shouted, "Don't swerve." I knew better out here. You learned that lesson as soon as you got behind the wheel. Then I realized it was a massive Roosevelt elk, its antlers nearly as wide as the windshield. "Doug," I said. I hit the brakes as hard as I could and steered to the right, away from the elk. The rule "don't swerve" doesn't apply with a creature that big. We ducked, another tactic we'd been taught, though elk herds rarely ventured this far east. When an elk hits a car, it'll crush the roof and you under it. A thump as the truck hit the animal, but it was a glancing blow and the elk only stumbled, then crash. Something hit my door. Then a doe scrambled right over the hood. "They're running into the truck!" Daniel shouted. "Drive!" I hit the gas. Another thud. I looked over to see the huge elk charging. Its antlers hit and the truck rocked, threatening to tip right over. The animal backed up. Its eyes rolled in rage and panic. It charged the door again. The glass smashed. Daniel grabbed me, but I was caught in my seat belt. He fumbled with it as I braced for the next blow. "Calm down," I thought. "Please, please, please, calm down." The elk hit the door but seemed to check itself at the last second. It snorted. Hot air blasted through the window. I could smell the beast, smell its panic. It backed away, head lowering, those huge antlers swinging through the window, one prong brushing my cheek as I ducked. "Just calm down. Please calm down." "Got it," Daniel said. The seat belt flew loose and he grabbed me as the elk charged again. "Hang on!" Daniel shouted. I clutched the steering wheel, but at the last second, the elk swerved. Then it stood there, sides heaving, looking faintly confused, as if it had forgotten what it was doing. Daniel threw open the passenger door, and we tumbled onto the road. The elk snorted again and nudged the truck. It rocked. I scrambled out of the way, tugging Daniel after me. "Hey!" someone shouted. I caught the distant pounding of footsteps. "Hey! Yeah, you! Get out of here!" I knew that voice. Knew it, but couldn't believe I was hearing it. I turned to see Rafe running toward the elk, waving his arms. The rest of the herd stood on the side of the road, milling about in confusion, waiting for their leader. "Go on!" Rafe shouted. "Move it!" The elk snorted. Then, with a dismissive flip of its tail, it bounded across the road and into the forest. The herd followed. I tried to stand, but Daniel made me sit on the ground as he checked me out. He squeezed my shoulder and I winced. "Just bruised," I said. "I can walk." Rafe jogged over to us. "She was driving? Is she okay?" "Yes, she is," I said, getting to my feet. I looked behind him. "Where's Annie?" Rafe stopped and looked at Daniel. "Took off," I said. "Like she does sometimes." He nodded. "We set out this morning, but we didn't get far before she ran away," I finished. A glance at Daniel, then he went on. "Right." I sat down to wait. "She comes back when she's done, and there's nothing else I can do until then." This time, though, she was gone longer than usual. I started getting worried, so I left our packs and headed down the path. That's when I smelled the smoke. "I've been looking for her. I heard the crashing, came out to the road, and saw you guys." Daniel anxiously eyed the smoky horizon as Rafe explained. He tried to start the truck, but it was too badly damaged. "We have to go," he said. "That fire's coming fast." Rafe shook his head. Go on. I need to find her. She's probably just back at the cabin. She's not, I said. We just left there. He rocked on the balls of his feet and I could tell he'd barely heard me. I grabbed his arm. Rafe. What? I lowered my voice as I pulled him away from Daniel. She's a cat, right? She thinks like a cat now. She'll do what every other animal is doing, running away from the fire. We'll cut through the forest and try to find her on our way back to town. He nodded. I'll do that. You guys go on. The road's faster. If Annie's out there, I'll help. We'll help, Daniel said as he walked over. Now let's move it. We split up, staying within shouting range. Daniel veered off first. Rafe came over to me after Daniel was gone. You didn't tell him, right? He said. No, not yet, I thought. I was sure he'd insist that I never tell Daniel, and I had every intention of doing so, as soon as we were out of this mess. If he sees her in cat form, he'll say something to warn us. If that happens, we'll figure something out. But we'll find Annie. One way or another, we'll find her. Maybe I'd been driving fast enough to put some decent distance between us and the flames. Or maybe the fire had shifted direction or hit a fire break. Whatever the reason, as we searched we weren't running for our lives with flames licking at our heels. We could smell it, and ash flakes still drifted down, so we moved at a steady jog, a few hundred feet apart, calling for Annie as we made our way to town. Like us, the wildlife was on the move but not as panicked about it. I saw families of raccoons and a small herd of black-tailed deer making their way steadfastly toward town. When I caught a glimpse of tawny fur slinking through the underbrush, I picked up speed. Both guys ran over just as the cougar appeared around a hemlock and glanced over at me. Then I saw the grizzled fur and torn ear and let out a sigh. Marv. He stopped and chirped. Go on, I said. Find some place safe. Another chirp, like he understood, and he took off at a lope into the forest. We'd gone about another 20 feet when a crashing in the trees had us all jumping. Something was running our way. Something big enough to make the saplings shake and the dead undergrowth crackle like gunfire. Bear! I shouted. 35. It gripped the bottom branch of the nearest big tree and swung up. Daniel followed. As I crouched on the branch, I looked for Rafe and found him where I'd last seen him, just standing there with this weird look on his face, like he wanted to run but couldn't. He glowered at the bear and his expression wasn't shock or fear. It was defiance. Rafe! I screamed. That snapped him out of it. He blinked and saw the forest flattening in a path heading straight for him. His lips formed a curse and he backpedaled. The bear shot up from the brush, rising on two legs with a roar. It was just a black bear. I say just because we do get the odd report of grizzlies swimming across from the mainland, and that's a whole other level of predator. A black bear is no harmless teddy though, especially Vancouver Island black bears. When this guy reared up, he was taller than Rafe and twice as heavy. Go away! I shouted. Shoo! Daniel whistled and clapped. Usually that's enough to get rid of them, but this one just stood there, snarling and waving his front paws, huge claws flashing. Enraged by the smell of fire or the smell of another predator, he wasn't leaving. Rafe glanced over his shoulder, looking for a closer tree, but nothing nearby would support his weight. Back up toward us, I said. Keep eye contact, and don't turn around. He nodded, impatient. He knew that. It was hard to remember he wasn't the city boy he pretended to be. The moment he started retreating, the bear roared again, dropped to all fours, and charged. Rafe did turn his back then to run for the tree. As the gap between Rafe and the bear narrowed, Daniel jumped to the ground, waving his arms. "Hey!" Daniel shouted as he raced for the next big tree. "Over here! Come on!" But the bear kept charging Rafe, tiny eyes blazing with rage. The overwhelming scent of musk filled my nose, making my brain shout mixed messages to run, to stand firm, to help Rafe. Then I remembered the elk. Power over animals. I closed my eyes and concentrated, telling the bear to relax, that everything was fine, we weren't a threat, he had to leave, get away from the fire. But the ground kept quaking, and when I opened my eyes, the bear was right behind Rafe. The bear snarled and snapped, but Rafe shot ahead just in time. I bent down to grab Rafe's hand. He waved me back, and with a flying leap, caught the bottom branch in both hands and swung up. The bear hit the trunk and I lost my balance. Rafe grabbed the back of my jacket and hauled me up, flailing, until I could grasp the branch again. "Climb!" he shouted. The bear backed away, shaking his shaggy head, dazed by the impact. He looked at me, and I froze, and I knew then what had stopped Rafe from running. When the bear met my gaze, any thoughts of escape vanished. Instinct said to fight. This was my territory, and no bear was going to take it from me. "Stand firm and..." Maya. Rafe grabbed my jacket again and nearly yanked me off the branch. "Climb." That snapped me out of it, and when I looked down now, all I saw was a very big bear. As I scrambled up, pain ripped through my foot, and something wrenched my leg. I looked down to see the bear's jaws clamped around my shoe. Daniel was running toward the bear, shouting and waving his arms. Rafe grabbed me under the armpits and yanked. My shoe came off in the bear's mouth as Rafe hauled me up to the next branch. The bear shook my shoe, growling, then tossed it aside. As it did, it noticed Daniel, standing only a few feet away. "Daniel!" I shouted. He backed up, looking for a suitable tree. The bear only snorted at him, then peered nearsightedly up at us. It rose on its hind legs, front paws hitting the trunk hard enough to make the tree quiver. I swung onto the next branch as Rafe did the same on the other side. I felt the bear's hot breath on my stockinged foot and snatched it away as his teeth clicked together. He roared in frustration, then leaned on the tree and shook it again. "Hold on!" Rafe shouted, like I was planning on doing anything else. I clung to the tree, arms around the trunk, as it swayed. The bear swiped at us, but we were well out of reach. After a moment, he figured that out and backed down onto all fours. He eyed us for another moment, then, with a snort, lumbered into the forest. "You okay?" Rafe said when the bear was gone. I sat on a branch and pulled my foot up. My sock was ripped, but the bear's teeth hadn't broken the skin. I squeezed my foot and winced. "Just bruised," I said. "Maya!" Daniel called. I tried to see him but couldn't through the thick evergreens. "We're fine," I yelled. "You?" He said he was all right, and I was about to climb down, when Rafe climbed over to my branch and crouched there. Seems that control over animals thing doesn't work so well with the animals we really need control over. "No kidding, hey?" I said. His head tilted as he scanned the forest. When he glanced back at me, I thought he was going to say something, but he only nodded toward the ground and said, "We should go. Fire's still coming. I can smell it." I twisted to kneel on the branch, so I could lower myself to the next one. As I did, I glanced up and realized we were in the biggest tree around. Which gave me an idea. I'm going higher first, I said, to look around for any. Good idea. I called down to Daniel to say what we were doing. Rafe was already 2 branches above me. I scrambled up after him. The faster I went, the faster he did, and I thought it was just coincidence until he grinned down at me. My heart sped up and I raced after him, trying to catch up, cursing when I couldn't. I forgot about Annie and the fire and the bear, and everything that happened before that, and it was just us again, climbing a tree, the bark rough under my hands, the sharp smell of pines surrounding me, the sound of his breathing pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. I didn't even notice I'd caught up until I was right beside him and he was leaning around the tree, smiling at me. Gotcha, I said. No. I stopped. He waved overhead and I realized we were as high as we could safely go. He laughed and I looked into his eyes, then swallowed hard and turned away to look for Annie. As I did, my hip bumped the trunk and something jabbed into my hip. I pulled out his bracelet. You'd better take this, I said. He shook his head. I still need to take off, track down answers. Keep it. But it's important to you. Proving I mean it when I say I'll be back. My cheeks heated and I pressed it into his hand. Please. I don't want to lose it. He took it. Before I could pull my hand back, he caught my wrist and tied the bracelet around it. Problem solved. I tried to glance down at it, but his fingers slid under my chin, eyes closing as his mouth moved toward mine. Our lips brushed. Then his eyes snapped open and he pulled back fast. I jerked away. Right. Bad idea. No, he pointed. That. I twisted to see a wall of smoke heading straight for us. Rafe started scrambling down the tree, shouting to Daniel below. I stayed where I was and got my first good look at the fire. To the north and south, the forest was clear and calm. There was just one huge swath of smoke heading our way. Rafe tugged at my foot. Come on. I took one last look, making sure I was seeing right. One patch of fire heading straight for Salmon Creek. That didn't seem natural. Rafe yanked again, but I was already coming down, calling for Annie as I did. There was no sign of her. Gone to safe ground. Or so I hoped. Once my shoe was back on, we ran. Within minutes, the ash began to rain down again. We kept calling for Annie, staying close together now, running full out toward town. Rafe heard the sound of an engine first and shouted, "Someone's coming." "Where's the road?" I waved to the north, but Daniel shook his head. "We're too far from it," he said. "We should be almost in town now." In other words, no time or need to detour. A few strides later, though, we hit a strip of empty land. "Road!" Rafe yelled. "It'll be quicker than running through the forest." It used to be a road, back when our town was just an empty space for logging camps. Then the St. Clouds came and the loggers left, and this road no longer led anywhere. The forest had crept in on either side, weeds stubbornly poking through the packed earth. But the diesel fumes I was smelling weren't 15 years old. As we stepped onto the winding road, I noticed a truck going the other way, barely visible through the trees. Daniel followed my gaze. "We'd never catch it. It's heading away from town, anyway." "But why?" "There's nothing over there." "Doesn't matter. Just keep moving." We'd just rounded the next curve when I heard the rumble of an engine behind us. I turned to see the truck heading back our way. They must have spotted us. Rafe started to lift his hand. Daniel stopped him. Let's be sure first. We moved into the alder bushes at the side of the road. When I looked over at Daniel, he was focused on the truck like a hawk watching an approaching cougar. I'd seen that look before. When I touched his arm, he didn't respond. I knew he wouldn't. What are we? Rafe began. SHHH. Daniel hissed, still staring down the road. Okay, Rafe said. Maya, what are we doing? We've got a fire bearing down on us, and a rescue truck coming. Daniel hit my back so hard he knocked the wind out of me. Down. I dropped. When Rafe didn't, Daniel pushed him to the ground, too. What? Rafe said, rolling out of his reach. SHHH. Daniel met Rafe's glare with one of his own. Something's wrong. I can tell. You can tell. Cool it, I whispered. Both of you. I lay there, under the alder bushes, the branches poking into my back. Ash drifted down like snow now. Tendrils of smoke wafted over on the breeze. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the steady crackle and the occasional rumble and roar as fire consumed the forest. I imagined the devastation, and my chest seized, tears springing to my eyes. My forest. My beautiful forest. It's getting closer, I whispered. We need to go. Just hold on, Daniel said. Let me figure this out. Figure what out? Rafe looked at me for an answer. When I didn't reply, Rafe turned away, tense and angry. I could feel that bursts of anger that made me anxious, too, every muscle tight, telling me to run, just run, before the fire caught me. The truck rounded the last corner. It was more like a cube van, yellow with some kind of crest on the side. I struggled for a better look. The air was getting hazy now. Invisible smoke stung my eyes. The fire department. Rafe scowled at Daniel. We're running from a fire and hiding from the fire department. I could see the insignia now, a red crest with a lighthouse in the middle. An auxiliary vehicle for Nanaimo fire rescue. Rafe started getting up. Wait, Daniel said sharply, not a request but a command. I swore Rafe's hackles rose. Just hold on a sec, I said. No. I'm sorry, Maya, but this is nuts. I need to get to town and see if Annie's there. Go on, then, Daniel said. But don't expect me to come to your rescue if you do something stupid again. Rafe stopped, crouching. Stupid? What did I? Standing up to a bear? Yeah, kinda stupid. Rafe's face reddened. It wasn't like that, I cut in. Rafe, just. The truck's brakes squealed. We were still beneath the alder, but they could have caught a flash of color through the branches. The truck was idling, less than 20 feet away. I caught the muffled sound of voices. Then a click and a slam as a door opened and shut, echoed by a second. Figures walked to the front of the truck. Anonymous figures in dark blue jumpsuits and gas masks. Rafe started to rise again. Daniel caught his arm. They're not from the fire department, he whispered. Right. In a fire truck, wearing fire. And carrying automatic rifles? Maybe that's standard gear for rescue workers in the States, but no one carries those here. Not even the cops. I saw the guns now, slung across the backs of the two figures. Fine. Rafe studied them, then said, I still think they might be search and rescue, but we shouldn't take the chance. He stretched out beside us again, moving carefully to not make any noise. The two figures still stood in front of the truck, looking around. Something stung my scalp and I jumped. Another glowing ember landed on my hand. The ash was falling heavier now, flakes glowing with fire. When I turned to look over my shoulder, I caught a blast of smoke that filled my mouth and nose, and I clamped my hand over them, struggling not to cough. "These guys aren't moving on fast enough," Daniel said. "We need to go. Back out slowly. Back." My heart raced. "Toward the fire? We can't." I stopped myself. Struggled for calm. Glanced over at Rafe and saw him doing the same. He met my gaze, and mouthed, "It's okay. Push past the instinct." That's all it was. Animal instinct telling me to get away from the fire at all costs. Human reason had to overrule. I crept backward. As we got into the thicker woods, Daniel's foot slipped and scat. He stumbled. I tried to catch him, but he grabbed a skinny pine for support. The tree creaked and swayed. Dead needles rained down. "Did you hear that?" a man's voice asked. "Someone's out there." "I see white." Daniel glanced down at his white tee and swore. Rafe yanked off his denim jacket and tossed it over. Daniel tugged it on as we moved. We were running straight into the fire now. A curtain of red shone through the trees. The heat blasted us. Ash and smoke filled our eyes and noses. The roar sounded like an oncoming train. I could hear shouts, though, and what sounded like an ATV. I swerved to the left, where the trees were thicker. When Rafe started to follow, Daniel caught his shoulder. "Split up," he shouted. "That way." He pointed in the other direction. Rafe took off. "Maya!" Daniel yelled. When I glanced back, he coughed, struggling to breathe. I veered toward him. "No," he said. "Go on. Head toward town. I'll stay close." I nodded and ran, circling back toward the road. 36. The smoke got worse with every step. Tears streamed from my eyes. Smoke seared my lungs and each breath burned. Was I heading in the right direction? My gut told me home was this way, but I'd gotten off course. Between the smoke and the ash, I couldn't see more than a few feet in front. I stumbled onto the road, nearly pitching face first when the ground dipped. I stopped and bent, getting my head as close to the ground as I could, breathing in the better air down there. Maya! With the distant roar and crackle of the fire, I couldn't tell if that was Daniel or Rafe. I turned, still bent, hands on my thighs as I blinked to see through the smoke. All I could make out was a figure walking toward me. At the last second, I saw the dark blue jumpsuit and wheeled toward the forest. Then I noticed the rifle pointed right at me. I stopped in mid-twist. I gasped for air as my brain spun, trying to find a way out of this, but knowing I couldn't. He was less than 10 feet away and that gun was aimed right at my chest. "Please," I said, lifting my hands. "You're the police, right? You can get me back to town." A lame plan, but if he didn't want to kill me, this was a way out. He would pretend to be the cops and get me back to Salmon Creek. He stopped walking. "Our truck broke down," I said, words rushing out. "We saw the fire. Can you help me?" He lowered the rifle. "Yes, oh please, yes." "Maya," he said. "No. Pretend you don't know me. Pretend you're just a cop. Please." I glanced across the road, then at the gun. How fast could I get to the woods? Faster than he could aim and fire? "It's okay, Maya," he said. "Everything's okay." He pulled off his air mask and smiled at me, and I stood there, frozen. He was about my dad's age. Brush-cut black hair. Tall and lean. He was native, but that wasn't what had me staring. It was his face, the cheekbones and the reddish-brown eyes. I'd seen those eyes and those cheekbones before. I saw them every time I looked in a mirror. Blood pounded in my ears. I could see him coming toward me, could see his lips moving, but couldn't hear anything except that rush of blood. Then a beep and a crackle, and he pulled a radio off his hip and lifted it to his mouth. "I've got Maya," he said, still smiling at me. "She's fine. She's going to come with me." I inched backward, trying not to look at the gun. When he saw me moving, his smile faltered. His lips pursed, like I'd insulted him. "Come on, Maya," he said. "We need to get you out of here." "No," I stepped sideways toward the woods. "I can make it from here. That fire's coming in fast. Let me take you." I twisted to run. I heard him shout my name. Glanced back to see the gun rising. I tried to stop, skidding on the dirt. The gun fired. "No!" The shout came from behind us. Daniel charged out of the smoke, his face flushed, even his eyes seeming to glow red. The man pointed the gun at me. Daniel shouted again, so loud it was like a sonic boom, more felt than heard. I staggered back. Then Daniel was there, grabbing my arm, pulling me, and the man was on the ground, struggling to get up. We ran into the forest. "Did you hit him?" I said. "What?" When I repeated the question, he just looked at me, confused. I thought he couldn't hear me, but before I could say it wasn't important, he said, "I guess so," like he wasn't sure himself, and I thought of the other day, when he said he'd hit his dad, but couldn't remember doing it. It didn't matter now. We kept running toward town. The crackle and bellow of the fire was so loud we couldn't hear if anyone was following us. It was like racing through endless fog, praying you're going in the right direction, knowing you are only when you can finally see the trees before you smack into them. A shout behind us. An answering one. The crash of a vehicle mowing through the undergrowth. Then the whine of an ATV engine. Daniel yanked me behind a huge Douglas fir. The ATV engine died to a low idle. Then a woman's voice sounded, harsh, like she was talking into a radio. "It's me," she said. "They're close by. Grab my coordinates and head over." Pause. "Already? Who have they evacuated?" Another pause. The woman swore. "Yeah, well, remind him that forest fires are one thing he can't control, even if they're set by Idaros. He wanted chaos? He's got it. He'd just better hope when the smoke clears, we have what we came for." She revved the engine. When I leaned out, trying to see it, I noticed a faint figure about 30 feet away, watching us. Before I could warn Daniel, the figure waved frantically, and I realized it was Rafe. He pointed to show us where the ATV was. Daniel nodded and whispered, "About 10 feet away in that direction." "Too close," I whispered back. "I know." Rafe motioned that there were 2 ATVs. I waved for him to take off. He was far enough to get away safely. He shook his head, and stepped out from his hiding spot. "What is he?" "Hey!" Rafe yelled, looking in the opposite direction. "Maya! Daniel! Where are you guys?" He stopped and slowly turned, as if just noticing the ATV. Then he took off, barreling through the brush. The ATVs followed. Daniel caught my arm before I could run after Rafe. He gave us a chance to get away. It won't do us any good to blow it. He's heading toward the main road anyway. They'll back off once he gets there. Those people had guns. Guns. But Daniel was right. With the fire closing in, we couldn't play cat and mouse. We had to get to town. So we ran through the forest, me in the lead, cutting the path, struggling to see, my eyes burning so much I could barely keep them open. The pain had moved into my skull now, a pounding headache. I'd pulled my shirt over my mouth, but it didn't seem to help. When I coughed, I splattered my shirt with black. Were we outrunning the fire? I was past noticing. The heat, the noise, the smoke, the falling ash, it was just there, all the time. Finally, I could hear the whoop of the town's emergency alarm. Almost there, I said, my voice hoarse. Almost. I stopped and turned around. Keep going. Daniel shouted, pushing me forward. I ran toward the road, my feet moving, my brain refusing to wonder why. Go on. I said when Daniel thundered after me. What are you? We reached the road. There, almost hidden in the long grass beside it, was a body. Rafe, I whispered. Oh God! Rafe! I ran over and dropped beside him. Daniel flipped Rafe onto his back and lowered his head to his chest. He's breathing, Daniel said. But barely. As he pulled Rafe up, I ran around him, searching for blood, a bullet hole, anything. It's smoke, Daniel said. Grab his other arm. I did, and we carried Rafe, one arm over each of our shoulders. After a minute, I could see a house ahead. Then another. Headlights pierced the veil of smoke. They started to turn, then stopped, brakes squealing. The lights swung our way. I froze and looked around, ready to bolt. Then I saw the vehicle, a familiar SUV with familiar faces in the driver's and passenger's seat. 37. Nicole scrambled out before the SUV even stopped moving. She raced over to us. Oh my God, she said. Everyone's been looking for you. They're evacuating us. The helicopter's here, and what happened to Rafe? Smoke inhalation, Daniel said. My truck broke down. Maya, Nicole, get inside, her father said. Daniel, help me get Rafe into the back. His sister's missing, I said as Nicole tugged me away. Has she come back to town? Not yet, Mayor Tilson said. But I'll let the search team know to keep looking. They laid Rafe across the back seat. I sat beside him, holding his hand and watching him breathe as Mrs. Tilson checked him out. She was a nurse at the clinic. As Mayor Tilson got back into the driver's seat, I said, there are people in the woods. They set the fires. The mayor's head whipped around so fast his elbow knocked the steering wheel. What? Drive, Phil, his wife said. Please. Just drive. We need to get the kids on the helicopter before the smoke's too thick for it to take off. They'll explain as we go. We did, as best it could be explained. There were people in the forest, pretending to be fire rescue officers. They said the blaze was set by someone named Idaros. I think they're after stuff from the lab, Daniel said. A fire means we'll all evacuate fast, leaving it unsecured. It's an extreme way to steal a project, but if it's important enough. It is, Mayor Tilson said. He called Dr. Inglis to tell her, and as he did, we asked Mrs. Tilson about everyone else. She said some of the families had driven out ahead of the fire, but most of the kids had been evacuated by helicopter. The last one was waiting for us now. She called my dad and said we were on our way. Then I got on the phone and he said Mom had already gone to Victoria with the animals before the evacuation began. She was safe and staying at the rehabilitation center until we could meet up. Dad was on his way to the helicopter pad. He'd see me there. Finally, we reached the laboratory. The pad was on top and I could hear the helicopter up there, the whump-whump of the propeller. We were almost to the front doors when Dr. Inglis came barreling out. "Are they okay?" She hurried to Rafe without waiting for an answer and impatiently motioned for Daniel and the mayor to put him down. "Can you give him something to wake him up?" Mrs. Tilson said. "That'll make it easier." No, when everyone turned to me, I hesitated. I knew what I had to say, and I knew Rafe might never forgive me for it. I took a deep breath, coughing slightly as I did. Dr. Inglis made a move to check me, but I waved her back. "His sister," I said. "He won't let you evacuate him without her." "She's right," Daniel said. "That's settled, then," Dr. Inglis said. "We'll get a stretcher to take him up while we keep looking for his sister." She took out her phone and stepped away to make a call. Mrs. Tilson bustled Nicole and me inside the building. When a third figure followed, I jumped, startled to see Sam there. I suppose she'd been in the SUV, but I'd been so stressed out, I hadn't noticed her. She just brushed past me and started up the stairs. When we reached the top, the helicopter pilot jogged over. Through the open doors of the aircraft, I could see Haley and Corey. They looked as numb as I felt, staring into space, pale and anxious. Haley lifted a hand in a hesitant wave. Corey unfastened his seat belt and leaped out. "Is this the last of them?" the pilot yelled over the deafening thump of the helicopter. "Two more," I said, lifting my fingers. "One's on a stretcher." "Who?" he asked, as if the answer would make a difference. "Rafe Martinez." He pointed at the helicopter. "Get in." "But my dad," I began. The pilot was already out of earshot, running to the door to help with Rafe. "I'm sure he'll be here, dear," Mrs. Tilson said, laying a hand on my shoulder. "Just go and get in. They need to lift off." I thought of the people in the woods. I wasn't getting in that helicopter until I saw Maya. Dad pushed open the door onto the roof. He ran over, Kenji racing alongside him, and caught me up in a bear hug, the way he hadn't since I was 12 and he couldn't swing me off my feet anymore. He managed to lift me now, though, hugging me so tight my lungs hurt. I threw my arms around his neck and hugged him back. "Everything's going to be okay," he whispered. "You're leaving now. The mayor is going with you. I'll follow on the next helicopter." "Fitz," I began as I patted Kenji. "He's in the jeep waiting for me." He smelled the smoke and hopped right in. He put me down and took out his phone. "Your mom wants to talk to you." "We don't have time for that," the pilot said. "We have a narrow window." Dad waved at Rafe. "Get him loaded. We'll be right behind you." He handed me the phone. Mom sounded like she was crying with relief. I assured her I was okay and Daniel was okay, and Rafe seemed fine, and we were getting on the helicopter now. "We have to leave," the pilot said, "or that last chopper will never make it in for the rest of you." Dad hugged me, tight and fierce. Then he helped me fasten my seat belt, kissed my cheek, and squeezed Daniel's shoulder. As he backed out, Kenji leaped in and laid down at my feet. "Come on, girl," Dad said. "You're going with me." When she didn't budge, the pilot reached in to grab her collar. She growled. "Leave her," Mayor Tilson said. "She's a good dog. She'll behave." The pilot looked ready to argue, but someone buzzed his radio, telling him he had to get going. He closed the door. Mayor Tilson climbed into the front passenger seat and looked back. Everyone buckled in. It was a big helicopter. 6 passengers in the back, plus Kenji at my feet and Rafe, stretched out on the floor, still unconscious. Daniel sat beside me, right behind the pilot. Sam and Nicole were adjusting their seat belts. Corey and Haley were in the last set of seats. We'd run through the drill often enough, everyone being told who they'd evacuate with, no changes allowed. Except Rafe. I looked over the seat at him. I thought of Annie. Had she managed to escape the fire? God, I hope so. When he woke up, though, and found out I'd made him leave without her, I took a deep breath. I couldn't think about that now. I'd made the only choice I could. He'd forgive me or he wouldn't. When I shivered, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand, whispering, "It'll be okay." I nodded. We had a lot of questions that still needed answers, but for now, the biggest danger, the fire and the people who said it, were behind us. We were safe, and there would be plenty of time for questions later. The helicopter wobbled once, then lifted off. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.